Ready for today's news from the Faroe Islands. We'll be covering politics, business, culture, and even the weather.
Sounds like a lot happening today.
Yeah, let's dive right in. Starting with politics, the Faroes Parliament just wrapped up its last session of the year.
Some interesting developments for sure. A bit of disagreement on a proposed sale clause in the Electricity Supply Act. And of course, the national budget passed for next year.
And there's all this talk about salary increases for daycare workers in Tórshavn.
Yeah, that's making headlines. Some politicians are bringing up budget cuts to public schools as part of that. Oh, and there's a new report. It highlights concerns about educational access for immigrant children.
Lots to unpack there. Now, shifting gears a bit, the Faroe Islands are back in the international spotlight, this time because environmental activist Paul Watson was released.
Right. He was held in Japan for 6 months, relating to disruption of Japanese whaling back in 2010.
And his release is getting strong reactions already. The Grindamannaphology, the Faroes pro-whaling group, has expressed some concerns.
And Watson himself says his fight against whaling isn't over.
Definitely a story to watch. Okay, moving on to business and industry. There's news from Faroe's fishing company Tjaldur.
They acquired a big stake in the Norwegian industrial company Survey Group. Could be a big move for them. And looking at the bigger economic picture, we've got some interesting numbers this month.
Right. November saw a slight increase in employment from last year.
Good sign. But Faroe's fish product exports are down 370 million DKK compared to last year at this time.
Mixed signals there for sure. Now, let's see what's up with culture and festivities. Christmas is coming up?
Lots of events planned. Silo Korea and Götu Kirkju Ungdomsskor, those are both great choirs, have concerts coming up.
Very festive.
Yeah.
And for the bookworms, a new book is out, Ein Undusum Jarging.
Mm-hmm.
That translates to A Miraculous Rescue.
72 stories in there. Sounds like a good read. Hey, before we go any further, should we check in on the weather?
Good idea. Looks like there's some serious weather happening.
Yeah, gale force winds are hitting parts of the islands. Some reports of damage in Sandavagar, that's on Vagar Island. So something to watch out for if you're out and about today. So diving back into some of these stories, there's that whole debate about heimablidni and tourism in the Faroe Islands.
Right, what's the deal with that?
Heimablidni means like home hospitality. So tourists can stay with local families and experience the Faroes culture, with home-cooked meals and all.
Sounds nice. So why are people in the tourism industry worried?
Well, the head of the Faroes Tourism Industry Association, they're concerned about people maybe misusing it, not following safety rules, or using it to kind of get around regulations.
I guess any good idea can run into trouble when it gets more popular.
Exactly. It makes you think, how do you keep things growing like tourism, but also keep it sustainable and responsible?
Yeah, tough balance. And what about the Faroe Islands culture in general? How does this fit in?
The Faroe Islands, they have really close communities and a strong tradition of hospitality. So as tourism grows, figuring out how to preserve those values is a challenge.
I see. This heimablidni debate is kind of a small example of that bigger issue. Okay, back to politics. The debate over salary increases for daycare workers in Tórshavn is getting pretty intense.
It shows how important early childhood education is and the role of, those who work in that field.
We've heard politicians pushing for more investment in daycare and others saying we need to stick to the budget.
Tough choices. This happens a lot, governments trying to balance different needs and use resources wisely.
Speaking of tough choices, what about Paul Watson and the whole whaling issue?
Watson's release and him saying he'll keep fighting whaling has definitely put the Faroe Islands back in the spotlight.
Yeah, whaling's a part of Faroe's culture, but it's getting more and more criticism globally.
Definitely a story that's going to keep developing. Now, before we wrap up, those mixed economic signals we talked about.
Right. The employment increase is good.
But the decrease in fish exports.
That's a big deal. What's going on there?
Lots of possibilities. Maybe global markets are changing, maybe consumer demand, or maybe even internal issues in the industry itself. Quotas, sustainability, competition. It's complicated.
Shows that even though the Faroe Islands are geographically kind of isolated, they're still very connected to the global economy.
Absolutely. And it highlights why diversifying the economy is so important. If you depend too much on one industry, you're vulnerable.
And maybe this move by Tjaldur, that fishing company that bought a stake in a Norwegian company, is a step towards diversification.
Could be. Moving beyond the traditional fishing industry, it's definitely an interesting development.
And we're back for our final look at today's news from the Faroe Islands. We've covered quite a bit.
We have. But there's always more to talk about.
True. Amidst all this talk of politics and economics and global issues, it's nice to see that Christmas spirit is still alive and well. We talked about those upcoming concerts, Silokori and Götu Kirkju Ungdomskor. They're both such talented choirs.
Yeah, always a treat.
And for those who prefer something a little quieter for the holidays, that new book, Ein Undersum Jarging, sounds really fascinating.
A miraculous rescue. 72 stories. Should keep you busy for a while.
For sure. Okay, before we wrap things up completely, maybe a quick weather update.
Right. Those gale force winds we mentioned earlier, still pretty strong in some areas.
It's a good reminder of just how powerful nature can be, especially out on the islands.
Definitely. But, even with the strong winds and the challenges, there's still that beauty and resilience that you always find in the Faroe Islands.
Well said. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into today's news.
From politics to business, culture to weather, it's been quite a journey.
And we hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for listening.